Okay, Alexander, let's talk about a topic that I think is interesting for a lot of people, and that is Russia's moves. Now that you have this kind of this dispute for the president of the United States. Now, once again, we don't know who's going to be president. I'm confident that that Trump can take it. Maybe by the time this video goes up, things will change and Trump will be ahead. Maybe by the time this video goes up, Biden will be ahead. I don't know, but let's. There's two moves that I think Putin made, which I think are interesting. One of them is he's starting to deal with Erdogan. Another one is that he's starting to focus in on Syria as well. And I think this is no coincidence, given the fact that the Biden campaign and even a Biden advisor had said that Syria is on the table. They've made many claims that Russia is going to be targeted. I'm paraphrasing, but they've used diplomatic speak to say that Russia's going to be on the table. There's obviously a lot of talk about the jihadists that are heading into the Caucasus, and I wouldn't be surprised if the United States under Biden, with the neocons and the neolibs that will infest his White House and run his foreign policy, given that Biden's going to be a dementia-plagued, feeble, fragile U.S. president. You know that the neocons and the neoliberals are going to take control of the foreign policy. I'm sure they're going to put the same playbook that they used in Syria into effect in the Caucasus. I wouldn't be surprised to create instability underneath Russia's southern border, i.e. flooding it with jihadists and maybe try to get a Chechnya repeat. So Alexander, Putin, I think, is starting to finally wake up and address these very serious situations, because if Biden is in the White House, the neocons and the neoliberal war machine will, without a doubt, go to destabilize Russia, destabilize Putin, and tear the Russian Federation apart. What do you think?
This is exactly right. Now, a couple of months ago, there was a Rand Corporation study, which is all about destabilizing Russia. And it was basically about creating problems on Russia's periphery and trying to get the Russians so focused on trying to, put out the fires around their periphery that they lose focus on their own economic situation, with the result that a economic crisis eventually develops, and that precipitates the collapse of the government of Russia. This is a Rand Corporation study. This is, and the Rand Corporation is a very serious organization in the United States. It's very connected to the Pentagon, to the Defense Department, to the various intelligence community people. So it is completely likely that this is, in fact, actual US policy, at least, or perhaps I should say actual US deep state policy. I don't think it's Donald Trump's policy, but as we've seen, Donald Trump has difficulty sometimes getting the US government, all its various parts, to accept his policy line. If he becomes president, if he remains president, as I still think is possible, I still think it's in fact perhaps likely, but as of the time of this video, as you rightly said, we don't know, then I would expect him to take more control of US policy. But if Biden comes in, then of course all of this will be activated even further. And of course the Russians are fully familiar with the Rand Corporation study. They've been seeing what's been going on in their various regions around Russia. We know that there's been an attempted color revolution in Belarus. That seems to have been stifled, or at least brought under control for the moment. Lukashenko's still there. The various attempts to organize a general strike in Belarus have failed. The protests against him have apparently diminished in size. They have, however, reportedly become rather more violent, which may be intended to provoke a reaction. But anyway, the situation there seems to be under some sort of control. There was, as we also know, a major crisis in Kyrgyzstan. Russians sent one of their ministers there. He was able to leverage into the presidency a man called Jarapov, who nobody had heard before, but who is now widely considered to be Moscow's man. There was a furious article about this, by the way, on the Voice of America website, the Voice of America being very much under neocon control. But the big overarching problems are Ukraine and, of course, the Caucasus. And not just the Caucasus. If we're talking about the Caucasus, we talk about Turkey, we talk about Syria. And it is important to understand that one of the primary reasons why Russia intervened in Syria in 2015 was because Syria is actually geographically not that far from the Caucasus. The Russians had fought a bitter and very difficult war in the Caucasus from 1999 until about 2008, 2010, against jihadi insurgents there. They were very concerned that if Syria went under and an Islamist regime, maybe even an ISIS regime established itself there, it would target the Caucasus again. So they went into Syria in order to preempt that. They have been absolutely clear about this. And at the same time, they've had this very odd and complicated relationship with President Erdogan of Turkey, who is sometimes their friend, sometimes their enemy, who's tried basically to undermine them in Syria at the same time as he's trying to work with them in Syria, with whom they have various economic agreements, who's bought arms from them, who's got problems with some Western states and allies of the US, but whom I think fundamentally and ultimately the Russians don't trust. Now, Erdogan has recently restarted this conflict in the Caucasus between Azerbaijan and Armenia over this territory of Nagorno-Karabakh. And the Russians have looked upon this with growing horror. And what has now emerged is that there has been a meeting by a Biden team official and apparently Syrian opposition leaders, in which Biden, this official, we don't know his name, but apparently this official has assured them that the United States will maintain a military presence in northeast Syria in order to destabilize the Assad government, that it will put greater economic pressure on Syria. There is huge economic pressure on Syria already, and that it will support Turkey's moves in Idlib province. This is this province in northwestern Turkey where there are still many jihadi fighters based. So that suggests very much a reach out to Turkey by a future Biden administration, and also a greater role for Turkey with the support of the United States in Syria itself, in Idlib province. So we have seen a number of Russian reactions. Firstly, the Russians have intensified military operations in Idlib province, and there's been a series of Russian bombing raids on jihadi positions in Idlib. The Turkish military, which has presence in Idlib, has been forced to pull back in various places. We've actually seen Turkish military posts being first encircled, and then the Turkish troops there being forced to withdraw. I understand, though it's very difficult to get precise information, that the actual Idlib pocket has now been reduced very considerably in size to basically Idlib city, which is still under jihadi and Turkish control, and a strip along the Turkish border. And it seems the Russians are pushing very hard there, obviously with the backing of the Syrian army. And at the same time, the Russians over the last few days have strengthened their position, their actions in the Caucasus. There has been another very, very acrimonious telephone conversation, apparently between Putin and Erdogan, in which Putin again criticized Erdogan for allowing Turkish mercenaries, Syrian mercenaries, he means jihadi fighters, to go to the Caucasus. The Russian Foreign Ministry has issued a statement criticizing the transfer of mercenaries, foreign mercenaries, by certain foreign governments to the war in the Caucasus. Again, everybody knows that means Turkey, and that means these jihadi fighters. And lastly, we are now seeing more evidence of Russian military moves on the ground. The Russians have redeployed some of their troops in Armenia. They have military bases in Armenia. They've now redeployed some of their troops to the Armenian border. And this is in an area near where the fighting between the Azerbaijani military and the military of Nagorno-Karabakh has been taking place. It's near a place called the Lachkin Corridor, which is used by Armenia as a logistical route to send supplies into Nagorno-Karabakh. And in fact, what we are hearing is that the fighting in this region has abated. And Putin has himself come out and he's made a further statement saying that despite the meddling of outside powers, and I think he was explicit this time that Turkey is in fact the country that he was referring to, he is now confident that a ceasefire will shortly be not just declared but enforced. So the Russians are now taking steps, it seems to me, to stabilize both the situation in Syria and in the Caucasus. And they're doing that, I think, in anticipation of whatever moves a possible Biden administration may make in those places.
Yeah, I think we've called this perfectly. Hope for the best. This should be Russia's strategy. Hope for the best, i.e. a Trump win. Prepare for the worst.
Correct.
i.e. a Biden win.
Yes.
One final question, two parts. One final question. Looking at the Caucasus, Armenia, I think it's safe to say that even though the Trump administration was, it seemed that they were leaning more towards, I mean, they played it diplomatic. They were diplomatic about it, but they were leaning more towards Armenia in this conflict. I think it's safe to say that a Biden White House, not that they're antagonistic towards Armenia or the Armenian population, but they will definitely work with Turkey to arm the Caucasus to the teeth with jihadists, because it wouldn't be about Armenia. They wouldn't care what happened to Armenia. It would be about dismantling Russia, just causing chaos for Russia. So I think it's safe to say that Armenia would pay a very heavy price with a Biden presidency. Part one. Part two is I'm on antiwar.com, and I'm going to read you a very quick quote. It's the last paragraph of the article, and it says, the advisor said a Biden administration, this is the advisor that was speaking to the Syrian jihadists. The advisor said a Biden administration would, quote, make clear to Russian President Vladimir Putin that there can be no American or European support for the reconstruction of Syria unless political reform takes place. At the same time, this advisor said, quote, at the same time, Biden's approach will look for ways to strengthen the Turkish operations in Idlib, which currently protect nearly 3 million people from Syrian and Russian aggression. So I'm reading that as saying, President Putin, get out of Syria, or else we're going to just ramp up a proxy war, and telling Erdogan we're on your side, and keep those 3 million people in place so that they can, on the one hand, flood Syria. The jihadists can flood Syria to the south, and you have leverage over the Europeans and the migration policy to Europe as well. So I think this is an overture to Erdogan that we will support you in all your chaotic endeavors, Alexander.
You're absolutely right. That's exactly what it means. Now, I know that a lot of people in the United States may see or think that a Biden administration would be sympathetic to Armenia. The reality is that the overriding obsession of the people around Biden is Russia. If Armenia gets in the way, they'll steamroller Armenia, because that's what they do. They are fixated on going after Russia. And you had it there. It's quite clear. He is talking about renewing the de facto alliance to destabilize Syria that the Obama administration had with Erdogan. I mean, that was what started the Syrian war. So the Turks would find that, well, Erdogan would find that he has all the support, again, of the United States to start all his wars and fightings and interventions in Syria that he had previously. And as you absolutely rightly say, they would try and keep these jihadi fighters in Idlib province, and at the same time they'd use those 3 million people as, leverage over the Europeans. Note this extraordinarily interesting statement about how the United States and Europe will make sure that Syria does not achieve, doesn't get reconstruction aid. I mean, Biden talking for Europe. I mean, that's quite a thing, actually. And they feel they can do it because they know that they would have this piece of leverage. As for the question of so-called political reform in Syria, that has always been a euphemism for getting rid of President Assad, reconstituting the regime. In other words, regime change. That's what it's always been about. It's been all the way right back. If you go to the beginning of the Syrian conflict in 2011, that was the language that was always used. So that's what that's all about. I mean, there's no real secret about this. Anybody who has followed the history of this conflict carefully can see that, and at the same time make as much trouble for Russia in the Caucasus as you can, which is to be very clear what happened before, between 1999, when Obama was still president, all the way up to the 2010. There was all this fighting in the Caucasus. And the Russians, Putin has said so straightforwardly, that they know that the jihadi fighters there had the help of the United States and its allies. So that's what the whole plan is. Now, as I said, the Russians are reacting. They're acting hard. I think that they will, make sure this doesn't happen. But they will act very firmly and very quickly now to bring it all under control, and that's what they're doing. And I think that Azerbaijan, they can put enormous pressure on. Erdogan is, of course, a different story. He's a law unto himself.
Yeah, the Russians have to act fast. What a pity. What a pity. I really think a second-term Trump, and we're still not, it's still possible, but I would say that a second-term Trump would have moved us closer to getting peace in a lot of places. And I think even a rapprochement with Russia, because I think Trump wouldn't care about the stupid Russiagate Putin's puppets thing in a second term. I think he would brush it off. What a pity.
Well, I agree. Well, first of all, I mean, note how Russiagate has vanished. Nobody talks about it anymore in the US. I mean, that's all gone. But beyond that, let's just focus again on these issues, what we're talking about. What we're looking again at is the revival of that old policy going all the way back to the 1980s, when it was used against the Soviets in Afghanistan. It's been used against the Russians in the Caucasus. It's been used in Syria, playing fire with jihadis. Donald Trump totally opposes that. He is viscerally against it. So, by the way, if you spend any time talking to Americans, you find the vast majority of Americans are viscerally against it. There are some people in the State Department and in the CIA and in other elements of the deep state and in the various think tanks in Washington who are obsessed with this policy. One of the reasons they went so hard against Michael Flynn, Donald Trump's first national security advisor, is because as head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, he said this policy is wrong. It is only making problems for the United States. It's contrary to our own interests because we are arming, equipping violent people who are opposed to us and who are perfectly capable of doing terrible things to us, as they have in the past. And yet we see all of these same people, the neocons, the people embedded in the State Department, the CIA, who are surrounded Biden, while they're in all the think tanks in Washington, they still want to refer to this. And it's very dangerous. And, it would be a tragedy if it's all reactivated all over again. And it would be a tragedy for the US. I mean, For Russia,
Tragedy for the world.
huge problems, but for the US, a disaster. Disaster for Europe too. And, you know, France is just having a whole spate of terrorist incidents. Is that where we want to go back? But, you know, when we're talking about people who have a Russia on the brain all the time, as I said, playing with jihadis, you know, trampling over Armenian interests, those are not things that ultimately concern them very much.
It'll be a tragedy for the people of Armenia. It'll be a tragedy, such a tragedy for the people of Syria again.
Oh, it'd be a
and
tragedy,
of course, for the American soldiers and the Russians in the whole region.
Absolutely, it'd be a tragedy for everybody. As I said, some people wanted to play these games of geopolitical chess against the Russians, and all they do is create havoc and chaos and trouble. But that's where we're going. That's where, you know, with the Biden administration, clearly we'll be heading back. And that article that you've just been reading, and this discussion by this Biden team person tells us that that's exactly where they intend to go.
Yeah. We'll leave it there, Alexander. So many people are going to suffer under a Biden foreign policy, but Trump is a racist. So,
oh, well, indeed. I mean, absolutely.
There it is. Ridiculous, God. Anyway, all right, guys. PayPal, Patreon, Subscribe Star. Please subscribe to this channel. Duran Shop, help us out. That's all I have to say.
That's all I'm going to say. But look, here's the flag of the US on one of our mugs. Armenia there? Yeah, Serbia.
And I've got Armenia.
And you've got Armenia.
And Germany.
And Germany.
And an enamel mug for Germany.
And Germany. I've got Russia, actually. So there we go. Okay. So we've got all of these countries. And just to remind you, we've got our hats with this one has Britain. And if you go onto our shop, you will find amazing hoodies there, and you'll find wonderful products. You can Switzerland. Yeah. Yes. You can find all of these amazing products there. You support us by coming there. You support our brave and courageous and analytical and insightful channel. You get the best analysis anywhere by coming to us. And also you can help us by helping us on Patreon, Subscribe Star, by looking out for us on our other platforms, by coming to us in that kind of way. Not easy to do what we are doing. And my goodness, we've had a very, very demanding week, what with the events in the US. So the more you help us, the more we can provide all this wonderful information for you.
Yeah, you'll find all the links in the description box down below. And yes, BitChute and ODYSEE. Look for us on ODYSEE, which is a really great platform, and BitChute as well. Take care, everybody.